I'm trying to sort of bring back this need for a human connection with objects, even within a mass-produced society. There's an obvious need to make a lot of stuff and volume and production. And I think because technology and computers have made our lives so much easier that I find there's a generation of people that kind of don't want to put the work to find success, right? Like physically make with your hands, that everything is so instant and fast that there's a disconnect with our daily process and our daily life and what we're doing. But so I kind of have this love for producing and making and working with my hands, and maybe sort of challenging what a computer can do, and sort of valuing the handmade process of stuff. And there's a sentiment to that. I think when you buy handmade crafts, or even just from the history of quilting, that this sort of like love that's put into these objects, whether they're completely perfect, that sort of imperfection of the human sort of making of an object is that there's a connection to the story and purpose. So the first process of the drawings was to kind of make it as minimal and simple as possible, right? So a single line. And I think finding where I most often had seen these lines, just lines in general, like on paper, was college paper, like writing paper tablets and stuff like that. So once I started repeating this process of drawing them, I found myself kind of like understanding the language and the vocabulary of it, but trying to now make it more complicated. So ruled paper turned into gridded paper, which then turned into plaids, which then had a reference to textiles. And so in order for it to get more complicated and challenging, I had already built enough language that I was just trying to let it grow. But it really changed once I made the connection to fabrics and my mother, who worked in a sewing factory. And the other compulsive organizational visual thing that I found myself attracted to was that it was specifically these geometric architectural patterns, like not overly ornate or floral, but straight lines. So that, I kept thinking about like other areas in my life that I probably had an introduction to that, which was Catholic school and the plaids that we wore in our uniforms. And so that plaid also, the information of that was about identity and this sort of culture of a societal idea of how do we raise kids and try to make them not get overwhelmed with too much, so we give them a uniform so their identities become sort of equalized in a way, but it still wasn't. So the plaids have a reference to uniforms and culture and family and tribes and so I started to play with that idea as context to build the series, because I knew I couldn't go into just complete abstraction, because then it became just technique. And I was like, well, as much as I'm obsessed with the idea of just making and making and making, I needed to sort of fully connect with it. And so, building this stuff is about clocking in and out as much as it is about digging deeper into a visual language and sort of signals that kind of subconsciously tell us things. Earlier on, I was making drawings that would last me or it would take me 6 days to make, and I was done with the drawing. And now I'm making drawings that are like taking me months to complete, like literally putting in hours and hours and hours to build this thing and this piece that a computer could just whip out, but it's about the fact that I'm making it by hand. And I'm becoming faster. The earlier drawings that were taking me 6 hours, I can now do in 2 hours, the sort of same amount of like square footage. So that's one part of the fulfillment, or the kind of what keeps me making is, it's almost maybe like being an athlete. Like, when you're a young athlete, you kind of, you think you're great, you got some coordination, speed, and some strength, but then, you think about being an older athlete and really taking it to another level. I feel stronger, I feel faster, I feel like it's just more intense and more complicated. So one of the things that I like about looking at certain artists and artworks is that there's a moment where you kind of inherently just find an awareness, or you realize the artist is talking to you. And in my work, the moments that I feel like I'm like connecting and talking to the viewer is when it becomes imperfect. Because you know that there's a human touch or something behind it. It's not a computer making it. So when I was doing the earlier pieces, they were quite intimate, and I actually only had very few moments where the threads would unravel, which I really love. And they're personal, they're poetic, they're kind of a one-on-one experience. And I was making tons of these and stacks of them, and I started to try to figure out like how far could I push this unraveling moment before it would change this intimate connection with the viewer. But I think that it turns from like intimate, the smaller ones are way more intimate. And the larger ones sort of are bigger than most people's body sizes, and so when you approach them, I think it shrinks you down, and the pieces get like a little bit more overwhelming, and so there's a change of relationship there that you know that I like to. I guess that's why I kind of work in various scales. These are much louder, whereas the small ones are poetic and calm.